Hi there everyone. Tonight we're diving into something a bit risque, but totally historical. What Roman prostitutes did all day long. Trust me, it's not just what you think. So grab a drink, get comfortable, hit like if this sounds interesting, and maybe subscribe, but only if you really mean it. And don't forget to comment where you're watching from and what time it is. I love seeing how far this little corner of the internet reaches. Ready? Lights low. Fan on. Let's drift into the ancient world. Memoirs of a Roman courtesan. Life in ancient Rome. I feel the cold marble floor against my bare feet as dawn light filters through the narrow windows of the thermopolium on the Subura. Imagine waking in a cramped cell above a tavern, where the smell of soured wine mingles with the aroma of grilled sausages and human sweat. This was my world during the reign of Emperor Trajan, when Rome reached its greatest power. And I, a slave named Flavia, earned my living with my body. Picture the sounds of the awakening city, the creak of wooden wheels against basalt stones of the Appian Way, the cries of merchants hawking fresh bread and olives, the clink of bronze coins in the pouches of early customers, the air thick with smoke from oil lamps that burned through the night in the Lupernaria, the brothels scattered throughout the Subura, Rome's poorest quarter. My hands, still trembling from the morning chill, reach for the rough woolen stola folded beside my straw mattress. The fabric scratches against my skin, coarse and cheap, dyed with inferior madder that has faded to a dull rust color. Imagine running your fingers over this cloth, feeling how the threads catch and pull, knowing that each morning you must wrap yourself in garments that mark your station as clearly as if you bore a brand. The year was 106 AD, and Rome celebrated another victory. Dacia had fallen to Trajan's legions, and gold flowed into the city like water. Yet here in the Subura, beneath the shadow of the Palatine, where the emperor's palace gleamed with marble columns, we lived in squalor that would have shamed a provincial town. The morning ritual picture yourself descending the narrow wooden stairs, each step creaking under your weight, splinters threatening to pierce bare souls. The tavern below already bustles with activity. Lucius Valerius, my owner, counts yesterday's earnings, while his wife Tertia tends to the customers seeking their morning meal of bread, soaked in wine and honey. The smell hits you first. Always the smell. Urine from the fullers' shops where they clean the finest togas with human waste. The acrid tang of bronze being worked in nearby forges. Rotting fish from the markets by the Tiber. And underneath it all, the sweet sick odour of bodies pressed too close together, of people who bathe too seldom and work too hard. Valerius looks up as I approach. His face, scarred from his years as a gladiator before he bought his freedom, shows neither kindness nor cruelty, merely the calculating expression of a businessman assessing his most profitable asset. He nods toward the basin of water Tertia has prepared. Imagine kneeling beside this clay basin, feeling the lukewarm water against your skin as you wash away the previous night's work. The water turns cloudy with perfumed oils and the residue of cosmetics, white lead for the face, crushed antex for the eyebrows, red ochre for the lips. These substances burn the skin over time, leaving permanent marks of our profession. The morning ablution serves multiple purposes. It cleanses, yes, but also prepares. The ritual of washing, of applying fresh cosmetics, of arranging hair with bronze pins and combs. This transforms us from tired women into desirable commodities. Watch how I line my eyes with stibnite, how I redden my cheeks with crushed mulberries, how I oil my hair until it gleams like polished bronze in the lamplight. The economics of desire. Valerius owns 12 women, ranging in age from barely past childhood to those approaching 30. Ancient for our profession. We are property, recorded in his household accounts alongside his amphorae of wine and his bronze cooking vessels. Each of us generates different revenues based on youth, beauty, and specialized skills. Picture the morning accounting. Valerius sits at his wooden table, stylus in hand, wax tablet before him, calculating the previous day's earnings. A standard encounter brings 2 sestertii, enough to buy a loaf of bread or a cup of wine. More elaborate services command higher prices. A night with one of the prettier girls might cost as much as a denarius, 4 sestertii, the daily wage of a common labourer. But we see none of this money. It flows to Valerius, who deducts our expenses: food, shelter, cosmetics, the occasional physician when disease strikes. The mathematics of slavery are ruthlessly efficient. We generate profit, he retains it. Our only hope lies in somehow earning our freedom, purchasing it with coin we are never allowed to possess. Imagine the weight of this economic reality, pressing down like the summer heat. Every morning, you wake knowing that your body's capacity to generate desire directly correlates to your survival. Age, illness, injury, all threaten not merely discomfort, but death. There is no retirement from our profession, no pension for faithful service. The streets of Subura picture walking through the narrow lanes of the Subura as morning turns to midday. The streets barely wide enough for 2 people to pass. The upper floors of insulae, apartment buildings, projecting overhead until they nearly touch, blocking out most of the sky. Laundry hangs from every window, dripping water that mixes with refuse thrown from upper floors to create a perpetual mud that clings to your sandals. The neighborhood teems with life. Blacksmiths hammer iron in open-fronted shops. The ringing of metal on metal a constant percussion. Fullers stretch newly cleaned togas across wooden frames, the fabric gleaming white in the filtered sunlight. Bakers tend wood-fired ovens, filling the air with the yeast-sweet smell of rising bread. But notice how people's eyes slide away when they see you. Your clothing, your painted face, the way you move. Everything marks you as meretrix, a prostitute. Citizens avoid direct contact, not from moral outrage, but from social necessity. To be seen speaking with you implies certain transactions, certain needs. Children run through the streets, their voices echoing off the stone walls. Some are freeborn, though poverty makes their lives scarcely different from slaves. Others, like I once was, belong to masters who will determine their fate. I watch them play their games, knucklebones, ball-tossing, mock gladiatorial combats, and remember my own childhood in Gaul, before Roman legions destroyed my village and sold its survivors into bondage. Imagine the texture of memory overlaying present experience. Every child's laugh reminds you of losses you can never recover. Every citizen's averted gaze reinforces your place in society's hierarchy. The city itself becomes a vast machine that processes human bodies, extracting value from flesh while discarding the souls within. The afternoon trade. As the sun reaches its zenith, the real business begins. Picture the lupanarium where I work. A 2-story stone building wedged between a bakery and a metalworker's shop. The ground floor contains 10 small chambers, each barely large enough for a narrow bed and a clay basin for washing. Above, slightly larger rooms accommodate clients willing to pay premium prices for privacy and comfort. The walls display frescoes of erotic acts, painted in vivid reds and blacks that seem to pulse in the flickering lamplight. These images serve as advertisements, showing potential customers exactly what services they might purchase. Imagine running your hand along these painted walls, feeling the slight roughness where plaster has aged and cracked, seeing how countless fingers have traced the same figures over years of use. My chamber occupies a corner of the ground floor. A stone bed covered with straw mattress and coarse woolen blankets. A bronze mirror polished to reflect dim images. Clay vessels containing water, oil, and vinegar for cleansing. A small wooden chest holding my few possessions, combs, cosmetics, a bronze bracelet that once belonged to my mother. Picture the procession of men who enter this space. Merchants from the provinces, their clothing still dusty from travel, eager to sample urban pleasures unavailable in their hometown markets. Soldiers on leave from frontier postings, scarred and weathered, carrying the violence of their profession in their movements. Young aristocrats seeking experiences their refined educations never provided, nervous and fumbling but compensating with arrogance. Each encounter follows similar patterns. Money changes hands first. Bronze coins warm from the customer's palm placed on my wooden chest. Brief negotiations about specific services, conducted in the crude Latin of the streets, far removed from the elegant rhetoric of the forum. Then, the mechanical intimacy of bodies meeting for purposes of commerce rather than affection. Imagine the weight of pretense this requires. You must appear eager, responsive, grateful for attentions you neither want nor enjoy. Your face becomes a mask, your voice a tool, your body a commodity separate from your consciousness. Survival depends on this dissociation, this ability to retreat inward while flesh performs its assigned functions. The afternoon hours blur together, bodies press against you, breath heavy with wine and onions, hands rough from manual labor or soft from privilege, but all claiming temporary ownership of your flesh. Between customers, you wash with vinegar and oil, trying to prevent the diseases that eventually claim most women in our profession. The hierarchy of vice. Not all prostitutes occupy the same social stratum. Picture the spectrum that ranges from streetwalkers, women who service anyone for a few bronze coins in doorways and alleys, to the most exclusive hetairai who entertain senators and wealthy merchants in luxurious private homes. I occupy a middle position, neither the lowest nor the highest. I work in an established lupanarium, rather than on the streets, but I lack the education, beauty, or connections to join the ranks of high-class courtesans. My clients are working men, small merchants, the occasional soldier. They pay modest fees for basic services in surroundings that, while not elegant, provide safety and relative cleanliness. Above me in this hierarchy are women like Lydia, a Greek slave who speaks both Latin and her native tongue fluently, who can discuss philosophy and poetry, who knows how to play the lyre and mix sophisticated perfumes. Her clients include tax farmers, minor officials, successful tradesmen who appreciate cultural refinement alongside physical pleasure. She commands prices 5 times higher than mine and enjoys privileges I can barely imagine. Private chambers decorated with silk hangings, servants to attend her needs, clients who treat her almost as a companion rather than mere commodity. At the apex stand the legendary figures like Pr0stitutes, who once influenced political appointments through her relationships with powerful men, or Volumnia Cetheris, who counted Mark Antony among her lovers. These women transcend their origins as slaves or daughters of the poor to become forces in Roman society, accumulating wealth and influence that rival those of aristocratic matrons. Picture the bitter irony of this hierarchy. Success in our profession requires the very qualities, intelligence, charm, cultural sophistication that society otherwise prizes, yet the exercise of these talents marks us as irredeemably degraded. The higher you climb, the greater your influence, but also the more precarious your position, dependent on the continued desire of men who can discard you without consequence. Daily rhythms and seasonal changes. The rhythm of days follows predictable patterns, yet seasons bring their own variations. Summer in Rome means oppressive heat that makes the narrow streets of Subura almost unbearable. Imagine the thick, humid air that seems to press against your skin like a damp cloth. The smells intensify: rotting garbage, human waste, the sharp tang of sweat and unwashed bodies. Even at night, the stone buildings radiate heat accumulated during daylight hours. During these months, business shifts toward evening and nighttime hours. Citizens flee the heat during the day, conducting their affairs in the relative coolness of dawn or dusk. The lupinarium becomes stifling. The small chambers, airless ovens where flesh sticks to flesh, and every movement requires effort. Winter brings different challenges. The lack of adequate heating makes the stone buildings bitter cold. Imagine wrapping yourself in every piece of clothing you own and still shivering through the night. Braziers provide some warmth but consume expensive charcoal, costs that Valerius naturally deducts from our meagre allowances. The cold affects business as well. Fewer travelers venture to Rome during winter months, reducing the pool of potential customers. Those who do seek our services often want longer encounters in heated rooms, more conversation, more companionship. The commercial transaction takes on different qualities when both parties seek warmth and human contact as much as sexual gratification. Spring and autumn offer the most pleasant working conditions. Temperatures moderate, flowers bloom in the few gardens of the Subura, fresh food appears in the markets. Picture walking through morning streets when the air carries scents of blooming jasmine rather than rotting refuse, when your breath doesn't fog in the cold air or burn in the heat. These seasonal variations affect our health as well. Summer brings dysentery and other diseases that spread rapidly in crowded, unsanitary conditions. Winter sees respiratory ailments that can prove fatal to women already weakened by poor nutrition and constant stress. Spring and autumn provide brief respites when our bodies can recover some strength before facing the next extreme season. Religious observances and festivals. Roman religious life permeates every aspect of existence, including ours. Picture the constant presence of the sacred in daily routine. Household gods watching from their shrines, public temples dominating neighborhood forums, priests conducting ceremonies that mark the passage of time and seasons. For those in our profession, certain deities hold special significance. Venus, goddess of love and sexuality, receives our prayers and offerings. Small shrines to her appear in most lupinaria, decorated with flowers and provided with small offerings of wine or honey. The irony strikes deeply. We honor the goddess of love while knowing so little of love's reality. Priapus, The god of fertility and gardens also claims our devotion. His statues, prominently displaying his enormous phallus, appear throughout the Subura. Citizens touch these statues for luck, and we follow the same custom, seeking protection for our health and success in our work. During major festivals, the city transforms. Picture the Floralia, the spring celebration honoring Flora, goddess of flowers and the season of growth. For 5 days, normal social restrictions relax. Prostitutes participate openly in public ceremonies, dancing in the streets, throwing flower petals from building windows, celebrating with a freedom otherwise denied us. The contrast feels almost painful. For these brief periods, we emerge from shadows and margins to join the city's celebration. Citizens who usually avert their eyes now cheer our performances, accept flowers from our hands, acknowledge our existence as part of Rome's community. Then the festival ends, and we return to our designated invisibility. Religious observances also bring economic opportunities. Temple festivals draw visitors from across the empire, men who seek entertainment after fulfilling their devotional obligations. Holy days often become our busiest working periods, as crowds gather in the city and normal social restraints relax. Yet even in these celebrations, contradictions persist. Picture participating in ceremonies honoring gods of purity and domestic virtue, while knowing your very presence pollutes their sacred spaces in the eyes of many worshippers. The same society that creates demand for our services simultaneously condemns us for providing them. Food, clothing, and material conditions. Daily survival begins with food. Picture the coarse barley bread that forms the foundation of our diet. Dense, heavy loaves that fill the stomach without providing much nourishment. This bread, distributed at subsidized prices to Rome's poor, keeps us alive but offers little pleasure. We supplement it with whatever Valerius provides, or we can afford from street vendors. Olive oil, the cornerstone of Roman cooking, appears in our meals only in small quantities. Instead, we cook with animal fats, lard or tallow, that cost less but provide inferior flavor and nutrition. Vegetables come from the cheapest stalls in the markets. Wilted greens that merchants couldn't sell to wealthier customers. Root vegetables beginning to sprout or rot. Wine, diluted heavily with water, serves as our primary beverage. The undiluted wine goes to customers and free citizens. We receive the dregs mixed with enough water to make them safe to drink. Picture the slightly sour taste, the way it barely masks the mineral flavor of Rome's water supply, drawn from aqueducts that cross miles of countryside, but still carry traces of the lead pipes that deliver it to the city. Clothing reflects our status as clearly as our diet. The stola I wear each morning, woven from coarse wool and dyed with cheap pigments, marks me as a woman of low status, even without considering my profession. The fabric chafes against skin, retains odors, provides little warmth in winter, and traps heat in summer. Imagine dressing each morning in garments that announce your degradation. The colors, often yellow or other bright hues that advertise sexual availability, prevent any possibility of blending into the general population. Citizens recognize our clothing from a distance, allowing them to avoid contact if they choose. Our quarters reflect similar material constraints. Picture my chamber in the lupinarium, stone walls sweating with moisture, straw mattress that harbors fleas and lice, a single oil lamp providing flickering light that creates more shadows than illumination. The window, barely larger than my head, offers little ventilation and less view of the outside world. Personal possessions remain minimal by necessity rather than choice. Everything must fit in a small wooden chest, must be portable enough to carry if circumstances force relocation. A bronze mirror, polished smooth, but showing distorted reflections. Combs carved from bone or wood. Clay vessels for water and oils. Perhaps one piece of jewelry, a bracelet or ring that serves as both ornament and emergency currency. The constant presence of violence. Violence threads through daily existence like a poisonous river. Picture the casual brutality that shapes every interaction. The understanding that physical force can be applied at any moment by any free person against any slave. Valerius maintains discipline through systematic intimidation. A raised hand, a harsh word, the threat of sale to a worse master. These tools keep us compliant without requiring actual violence most days. But the potential remains constant, and periodic demonstrations ensure we never forget our vulnerability. Picture witnessing the punishment of a slave who attempted to keep coins for herself. The wooden stocks in the courtyard behind the lupinarium. The woman's wrists and ankles secured while Valerius applies a leather strap to her bare back. The sounds, the whistle of leather through air, the sharp crack against flesh, the involuntary cries of pain, the sight of welts rising on dark skin, of blood beginning to seep through broken tissue. These exhibitions serve multiple purposes. They punish the specific transgression, deter similar behavior from the rest of us, and remind everyone, slaves and free persons alike, of the absolute nature of our master's authority over our bodies. Violence from customers presents different but equally serious dangers. Most men content themselves with the services they purchase, but some carry their aggression into our chambers. Picture the sudden shift from routine transaction to potential threat. The customer whose hands tighten around your throat, whose voice drops to threatening whispers, whose arousal seems connected to your fear rather than your cooperation. We learn to recognize warning signs, to de-escalate dangerous situations, to call for help when necessary. The lupinarium maintains some security, other women nearby, Valerius within shouting distance, the understanding that seriously injured property represents lost revenue, but protection remains limited and conditional. Street violence poses additional risks. Picture walking through the Subura at night, when shadows hide potential attackers and the narrow streets become mazes where help might not arrive in time. Criminals prey on prostitutes, knowing we carry no legal protection, that our testimony holds no weight in courts, that our disappearance might go uninvestigated. The City Watch provides minimal security in wealthy neighborhoods, but largely ignores the Subura. We rely on informal networks of mutual protection. Other women, sympathetic shopkeepers, the occasional customer who takes personal interest in our safety. But ultimately, we remain vulnerable to any free person willing to risk Valerius's displeasure at damaged property. Diseases and physical degradation. Picture your body as a battlefield where multiple diseases wage continuous warfare. The close quarters, poor sanitation, and nature of our work create perfect conditions for every illness that afflicts urban populations. Skin diseases spread rapidly through the lupinarium. Scabies, ringworm, various rashes that leave permanent scars. These conditions mark us as clearly as our clothing. Customers sometimes refuse women showing obvious symptoms, creating additional economic pressure to conceal illness until it becomes impossible to hide. Venereal diseases represent our greatest occupational hazard. Picture the burning sensation during urination, the discharge that stains clothing and carries foul odors, the sores that appear on intimate areas of the body. Roman medicine offers limited treatments, lead-based ointments that poison while claiming to cure, herbal preparations of doubtful effectiveness, prayers to healing gods who seem to ignore our supplications. The progression of these diseases follows predictable patterns. Early symptoms might disappear, encouraging false hope of recovery. Then they return with greater severity, affecting not just the reproductive organs, but spreading through the entire body. Advanced stages bring madness, blindness, death, preceded by months or years of increasing disability. Picture the fear this knowledge creates. Every customer represents potential infection. Every symptom might herald incurable disease. Every day lived in apparent health could be the last before disease announces its presence. We learn to examine our bodies obsessively, searching for signs of the illnesses that eventually claim most women in our profession. Pregnancy presents its own dangers. Picture the desperate measures we employ to prevent conception. Douches of vinegar or wine, herbs reputed to cause sterility, crude mechanical devices inserted to block the womb. These methods sometimes work, but often damage the body more than the pregnancies they attempt to prevent. When pregnancy occurs despite precautions, options remain limited and dangerous. Herbal abortifacients may induce miscarriage, but often cause hemorrhaging or poisoning. Surgical procedures, performed by practitioners of dubious skill in unsanitary conditions, kill as often as they succeed. Those pregnancies, carried to term, rarely end happily. Picture laboring without adequate food, medical care, or rest, knowing that childbirth might kill you, and your child will likely face a life as degraded as your own. Infant mortality rates in the Subura exceed those in wealthier neighborhoods, and surviving children often show signs of malnutrition or disease acquired in the womb. Moments of human connection. Despite the degradation and brutality, moments of genuine human connection occasionally pierce through the commercial facade. Picture the regular customer who asks about your health, who remembers details of previous conversations, who treats you with something approaching respect rather than mere tolerance. Marcus Flavius visits weekly a middle-aged merchant who trades in imported spices. His manner differs from most customers, gentler, more conversational, almost apologetic about the transaction. He brings small gifts sometimes, honey cakes or fruit, offerings that cost little but represent recognition of my humanity beyond its commercial value. During our encounters, he speaks of his travels, describes cities beyond the mountains, tells stories of peoples who follow different customs. Picture lying in the narrow bed afterward, listening to accounts of places where women enjoy higher status, where slaves might earn freedom more easily, where life offers possibilities denied to residents of the Subura. These conversations create dangerous illusions. Marcus will never offer marriage, never purchase my freedom, never remove me from this life. He seeks temporary companionship and physical release, nothing more. Yet his kindness provides brief respite from the usual degradation, moments when I remember that beneath the painted face and commercial facade, some core of my original self survives. Similarly, friendships develop among the women in the lupinarium. Picture quiet conversations in the brief intervals between customers, sharing food when someone falls ill, offering comfort during the frequent losses that mark our profession. These relationships lack the permanence that freedom allows, but they provide essential emotional support. Claudia, a woman from Britain captured during the same campaign that enslaved me, becomes my closest confidant. We share memories of homelands we will never see again, teach each other words from our native languages, find comfort in understanding that transcends the crude Latin of commercial transactions. When disease finally claims her, a wasting illness that consumes her body over months, picture the grief that accompanies her loss. No formal mourning period, no religious ceremonies, simply the arrival of a new woman to occupy her chamber. Yet the friendships formed in such circumstances burn more intensely for their brevity, creating bonds that endure even when the people who created them disappear. The wider economic context. Our individual struggles take place within Rome's vast economic system, a machine that processes goods, services, and human beings with ruthless efficiency. Picture the empire at its height under Trajan. Territories stretching from Britain to Mesopotamia, trade routes carrying everything from Chinese silk to British tin, wealth flowing toward the capital like rivers feed in a great lake. The Subura serves as one small gear in this enormous mechanism. Picture the flow of money through our neighborhood, coins earned by prostitutes passing to brothel owners, tavern keepers, landlords, ultimately reaching the hands of Roman citizens who never soil themselves with direct participation in our degradation, but profit from its existence. Valerius himself occupies a middle position in this hierarchy. He owns property and slaves, commands respect from other businessmen, pays taxes to the imperial treasury. Yet his wealth derives from activities that mark him as morally suspect in the eyes of truly respectable citizens. Picture the delicate balance he maintains: prosperous enough to live comfortably, discreet enough to avoid official scrutiny. The broader economy creates demand for our services, while simultaneously condemning their existence. Soldiers returning from campaigns with pay accumulated over years of service seek entertainment unavailable in frontier camps. Merchants visiting Rome on business require diversions during their stays. Young men from aristocratic families explore pleasures their future roles as responsible citizens will not permit. Picture the hypocrisy this creates. The same society that produces moral philosophers condemning sexual license also generates the economic conditions that make prostitution profitable. Laws restrict our activities, while taxes collected from those activities fund public works and military campaigns. Trade networks that span the known world bring exotic luxuries to Rome: perfumes from Arabia, silks from the distant East, spices from India. But the women who provide intimate services to the men who profit from this trade remain trapped in the city's least desirable neighborhoods, our bodies generating wealth for others, while we ourselves subsist at bare survival levels. Legal status and social position. Roman law defines our existence with precise brutality. Picture a legal system that recognizes us as property, subject to sale, rental, or disposal at our owner's discretion. We possess no rights of testimony in courts, no protection against violence except as it damages valuable property, no legal identity separate from our commercial function. The Lex Julia de Adulteriis, passed under Augustus, codifies moral restrictions, while simultaneously acknowledging the necessity of prostitution for social stability. Picture the legal reasoning. Respectable women must remain chaste to ensure legitimate succession, but male sexual needs require outlets that will not threaten the integrity of citizen families. This legislation creates formal categories that govern our lives. Registered prostitutes, meretrices, operate within legal bounds, but suffer permanent social stigma. Even if we somehow achieve freedom, the mark of our former profession follows us forever. No respectable citizen will marry us. No decent neighborhood will accept us as residents. Picture the registration process itself, appearing before magistrates who record our names, physical descriptions, and assign prices in official documents. These records, maintained in civic archives, ensure that no former prostitute can escape her past by moving to another city or claiming different origins. Legal restrictions govern our clothing, our movements within the city, our participation in religious ceremonies. We cannot wear the stola of respectable matrons, cannot enter certain temples, cannot testify in legal proceedings, except when our own bodies serve as evidence of crimes committed against us. Yet the law also provides minimal protections. Masters cannot kill us without justification, cannot torture us beyond reasonable limits for disciplinary purposes, must provide basic food and shelter adequate to maintain our commercial value. Picture the cold calculation behind these protections. We merit safeguarding not as human beings, but as valuable assets requiring maintenance. Contract law governs our daily transactions. Picture the implicit agreements that structure each commercial encounter. Payment rendered for specific services, understood time limits, basic expectations of customer behavior. These contracts lack written form, but carry the weight of custom and mutual understanding. Disputes occasionally arise, customers claiming inadequate service, prostitutes alleging non-payment or abuse. Resolution depends on the relative social status of the parties involved and the potential impact on business operations. Valerius will support us against lower-class troublemakers, but defer to wealthy customers whose displeasure might affect his broader commercial relationships. The passage of seasons and years' time, in the lupanarium, follows different rhythms than the measured progression of civic calendars. Picture how months blend into years, without the markers that give structure to free citizens' lives. No career advancement, no accumulation of property, no family milestones to celebrate. My third year in Valerius's service brings subtle changes. The initial shock of my circumstances has faded, replaced by numb acceptance of daily routines. My body adapts to the demands placed upon it, developing calluses both physical and emotional that make survival possible, if not pleasant. Picture how you learn to partition consciousness, to separate the self that endures commercial transactions from the inner self, that maintains memories of home, dreams of freedom, fragments of identity that predate enslavement. This division becomes so complete that sometimes I forget which version represents my true nature. The women around me change more frequently than the seasons. Some succumb to disease, others to violence. A few achieve freedom through various means. New slaves arrive regularly, girls captured in border wars or born into bondage. Their initial terror and resistance gradually worn down by the same processes that transform me from a free Gallic maiden into a Roman prostitute. Picture the responsibility this creates, helping newcomers adapt to our circumstances while maintaining the emotional distance necessary for survival. Too much sympathy leads to madness. Too little erases the humanity that gives life meaning. Each new arrival reminds me of my own journey from freedom to bondage, from innocence to corruption. Seasonal festivals provide the only reliable markers of time's passage. The Lupercalia in February, when young men race through the streets striking women with goatskin thongs to promote fertility. The Floralia in spring, our brief moment of public visibility. The Vinalia in August, celebrating the wine harvest. These observances create rhythm in otherwise undifferentiated days. Picture how awareness of time's passage brings both despair and hope. Each month survived represents triumph over circumstances designed to destroy us, but also another month of youth and beauty, our only valuable commodities, irretrievably lost. The arithmetic of aging weighs heavily on minds that have little else to occupy them. Dreams and delusions. In the few moments between customers, when exhaustion temporarily overcomes the demands of survival, dreams surface like air bubbles rising through dark water. Picture the landscapes of memory that provide escape from present circumstances. The forests of Gaul where I played as a child. The voice of my mother singing lullabies. The taste of fresh milk and honey. These memories blur with fantasies of impossible futures. Picture imagining freedom, return to homeland, reunion with family members who probably perished when Roman legions destroyed my village. The mind creates elaborate scenarios to counteract the brutality of daily existence, stories where virtue triumphs and suffering finds redemption. Sometimes dreams take more practical forms. Picture calculating how many customers would be needed to earn freedom's price, if such earning were possible. 2 sestertii per encounter, perhaps 3 on good days, multiplied by months and years, growing into the thousands of sestertii that might purchase manumission from a generous master. The mathematics never work. Living expenses, medical costs, replacement of worn clothing and equipment. These deductions ensure that debt grows faster than earnings. Picture the cruel irony of an accounting system designed to perpetuate bondage while maintaining the illusion that freedom remains theoretically achievable. Other fantasies involve rescue by wealthy customers who might fall in love, purchase our freedom, and provide respectable marriage. Picture the dangerous comfort these delusions provide, how they make current suffering bearable by promising eventual reward. Yet observing the actual behavior of customers, their casual contempt, their instrumental view of our bodies, reveals how unlikely such outcomes remain. Some women lose themselves entirely in these alternative realities, retreating so far into fantasy that they can no longer function effectively in the commercial realm. Picture the fate that awaits those who cannot maintain the balance between dream and necessity. Sale to cheaper establishments, abandonment to street prostitution, eventual death from disease or violence. The challenge becomes sustaining hope without allowing it to overwhelm judgment, maintaining dreams without losing sight of immediate survival requirements. Picture walking this narrow line daily, hourly, finding reasons to continue existing while acknowledging the fundamental hopelessness of circumstances that cannot be escaped through individual effort. The decline of the body. By my 5th year in the lupinarium, physical deterioration becomes impossible to ignore. Picture examining your reflection in polished bronze, seeing how the lead-based cosmetics have scarred your skin, how poor nutrition has dulled your hair, how the constant stress has etched premature lines around your eyes. The diseases that infect most prostitutes begin manifesting symptoms. Picture the fatigue that no amount of rest can remedy, the pains in joints and muscles that grow worse each day, the rashes and sores that appear on your skin despite careful washing and the application of supposed remedies. Customers notice these changes immediately. Picture the negotiations that become more difficult as your commercial value declines, the pressure to accept lower prices for the same services, the gradual reduction in demand for your particular combination of youth and availability. Valerius calculates these developments with the same cold precision he applies to all business matters. Picture his assessments of your remaining profitable years, his consideration of whether investment in medical treatment might restore commercial viability or merely postpone inevitable loss. The other women observe your decline with mixture of sympathy and relief. Sympathy for suffering they understand intimately, relief that disease has chosen someone else as its immediate victim. Picture the complex emotions these observations create, the knowledge that their turn will come, the desperate hope that somehow their fate might differ from yours. Yet adaptation continues even in decline. Picture learning to mask symptoms with more skillful application of cosmetics, to time activities to minimize obvious signs of illness, to select customers less likely to notice or care about physical deterioration. The gradual loss of commercial value brings unexpected freedoms. Picture having time for conversations with other women, for observing the life of the neighborhood, for contemplating existence beyond the immediate demands of survival. These intervals, purchased with decline in health, provide opportunities for reflection previously impossible. The philosophy of survival. Living in circumstances designed to destroy human dignity creates its own form of wisdom. Picture developing philosophical perspectives born not from academic study, but from direct confrontation with life's fundamental brutalities and occasional graces. The concept of virtue, so central to Roman moral teaching, requires complete redefinition when applied to our circumstances. Picture understanding that survival itself represents a form of virtue, that maintaining any vestige of humanity under conditions of systematic degradation constitutes moral triumph. Traditional virtues, chastity, modesty, obedience, become instruments of oppression when applied to women whose only path to survival involves their violation. Picture recognizing that true virtue lies in protecting whatever core of authentic self remains intact, despite external corruption. The relationship between body and soul takes on immediate practical importance. Picture learning to separate essential identity from physical experience, to preserve inner integrity while allowing external violation. This division enables survival, but also creates permanent psychological damage. Questions of justice acquire desperate urgency when applied to circumstances where no earthly authority offers protection or redress. Picture developing concepts of cosmic justice, divine retribution, or karmic balance to explain why innocence suffers while evil prospers. The nature of human connection becomes visible in extreme clarity when stripped of social conventions and material advantages. Picture recognizing authentic kindness in small gestures, distinguishing genuine emotion from commercial performance, understanding how desperate circumstances reveal character's true foundations. Hope itself becomes a strategic resource requiring careful management. Picture rationing optimism like expensive wine, allowing just enough to maintain sanity, while avoiding the dangerous excess that leads to crushing disappointment when reality reasserts its harsh terms. The underground economy, beyond the official transactions recorded in Valerius's ledgers, an informal economy operates in the shadows of the lupanarium. Picture the networks of favor and obligation that develop among women who possess nothing but still find ways to trade assistance, information, and small comforts. Some women develop specializations that generate additional income, knowledge of herbal remedies, skill in hairdressing or cosmetic application, ability to read and write simple messages for illiterate customers. Picture how these talents create tiny streams of revenue that might accumulate over time into something approaching personal wealth. The disposal of unwanted pregnancies creates its own market. Picture the women who specialize in providing abortifacients, who know which herbs to gather from waste grounds outside the city, who understand the dangerous timing required to terminate pregnancy without killing the mother. These services command high prices paid in desperate circumstances. Information becomes another form of currency. Picture learning which customers pay well and treat women gently, which carry diseases, which become violent when drinking. This knowledge, shared among trusted associates, provides crucial advantages in negotiating the daily hazards of our profession. Some women cultivate relationships with guards, shopkeepers, or tavern workers that provide access to better food, advance warning of official raids, or protection from particularly dangerous customers. Picture the complex negotiations these arrangements require. The balance between providing enough service to maintain goodwill while avoiding obligations that might prove impossible to fulfill. The boundaries between legitimate and criminal activity blur in environments where survival itself requires constant violation of social norms. Picture participating in schemes that might involve theft, fraud, or smuggling, simply because refusing participation would mean losing essential protections or opportunities. Religious contradictions and desperate faith. The gods of Rome watch over every aspect of daily life, yet their presence in the lupanarium creates profound contradictions. Picture the household shrine to Venus that occupies a corner of our common room, decorated with flowers we steal from public gardens and supplied with wine we dilute from our own meager rations. We pray to the goddess of love while knowing nothing of love's reality, only its commercial simulation. Picture offering supplications for health, protection, and eventual freedom to deities who seem to ignore the suffering of their most devoted worshippers. Yet, faith persists because alternatives to hope lead only to madness or death. Some women develop elaborate personal mythologies to explain their circumstances. Picture believing that current suffering represents punishment for sins committed in previous lives, or testing by gods who plan to reward endurance with eventual blessing. These explanations provide meaning in meaningless circumstances. Others turn to foreign deities imported from conquered territories, Egyptian Isis, Syrian Atargatis, Germanic goddesses whose names carry memories of homeland. Picture secret ceremonies conducted in whispered voices, prayers offered in languages that predate Roman conquest, rituals that connect us to identities that existed before enslavement. The festival of Bona Dea, restricted to women and celebrated in private homes throughout the city, takes on special significance for those of us excluded from most religious observances. Picture the desperate desire to participate in ceremonies reserved for respectable matrons, to touch however briefly the sacred world that defines true Roman womanhood. When rumor spreads that sympathetic matrons sometimes include prostitutes in these secret rites, picture the hope this creates, that somehow our degradation might be temporarily suspended, that gods might accept worship from polluted hands, if offered with sufficient sincerity. The mystery religions that flourish throughout the empire offer different approaches to salvation. Picture hearing whispered accounts of Mithraic initiations that promise rebirth, of Dionysiac rites that temporarily dissolve social hierarchies, of Christian communities that allegedly welcome outcasts and slaves as equals. Yet investigation reveals that even these alternative faiths maintain distinctions that exclude women of our profession. Picture the crushing disappointment of discovering that divine mercy, like human compassion, operates within social boundaries that define us as permanently unworthy. The mechanics of aging. Out by my 7th year, the inevitable transition begins. Picture customers becoming increasingly selective, choosing younger women when available, negotiating more aggressively over prices that no longer reflect premium services. The mathematics of desirability follow biological imperatives that no amount of skill or experience can overcome. Valerius begins hinting at alternative arrangements. Picture the conversations that never quite become explicit threats, observations about declining revenue, suggestions that different forms of employment might better suit my current circumstances, reminders that maintaining unprofitable slaves represents poor business practice. The options available to aging prostitutes remain uniformly grim. Picture the hierarchy that extends downward from established luminaria to street walking to servicing the lowest classes of society in conditions that make our current circumstances seem luxurious by comparison. Some women transition to supporting roles within the sex trade, managing younger prostitutes, maintaining establishments, providing specialized services that don't require physical attractiveness. Picture the bitter irony of survival depending on exploiting other women in the same circumstances that destroyed your own youth and hope. Others find employment in related industries, serving wine in taverns where sexual availability remains implied rather than explicit, working in public baths where services might be negotiated privately, becoming domestic slaves in households where masters expect informal access to female property. Picture the desperation that accompanies these transitions, the knowledge that each step down the social ladder reduces already minimal protections and moves you closer to circumstances where death becomes preferable to continued existence. The few women who achieve actual freedom face different but equally challenging problems. Picture possessing legal liberty but lacking resources, connections, or skills that might support independent existence. Former prostitutes remain permanently marked by their history, excluded from respectable society, vulnerable to accusations and harassment. The economics of desperation. Daily survival requires constant calculation of risks, benefits, and alternatives within severely constrained parameters. Picture evaluating each potential customer not only for immediate payment, but for safety, disease risk, and likelihood of repeat business that might provide future income. Food becomes a continuous negotiation between hunger and expense. Picture choosing between bread that will fill your stomach and the small luxuries, fruit, cheese, meat, that provide nutrition necessary for maintaining health and appearance. Every copper coin spent on adequate food represents money unavailable for other necessities. Medical care, when available, demands payment that often exceeds our ability to provide. Picture suffering from ailments that could be treated but remain untreated because the cost of physician visits and medicines exceeds our resources. Illness creates a cruel cycle. Poor health reduces earning capacity, which reduces ability to afford treatment, which worsens health. The constant presence of debt creates additional pressure. Picture owing money to suppliers of cosmetics, to women who provide illegal services, to landlords and shopkeepers who extend credit against future earnings. These obligations accumulate faster than income, creating spirals of dependency that become impossible to escape. Competition among prostitutes for customer attention sometimes leads to price cutting that benefits no one except brothel owners and customers. Picture the pressure to accept lower fees rather than lose business to women willing to work more cheaply, and how this dynamic drives compensation downward for everyone. The few women who manage to accumulate small savings face the constant temptation to spend these reserves on temporary improvements to their circumstances. Better clothing, superior cosmetics, additional food that might increase earning potential but also eliminate the resources needed for eventual escape. Picture the psychological weight of understanding that every economic decision might determine not just immediate comfort, but ultimate survival. That choosing wrongly between competing necessities could trigger consequences lasting years or ending in death. The politics of the neighborhood. The Subura operates according to its own political dynamics, influenced by, but not entirely controlled by official Roman governance. Picture the informal hierarchies that determine access to resources, protection from violence, and opportunities for advancement within severely limited possibilities. Brothel owners like Valerius wield significant local influence. Picture their negotiations with neighborhood officials, their contributions to local festivals and public works, their ability to provide information about criminal activities or political dissent within their territory. The relationship between prostitutes and local merchants creates complex webs of mutual dependency. Picture shopkeepers who extend credit to women they know cannot pay, but who also rely on our customers for significant portions of their business. These relationships involve constant negotiation between exploitation and cooperation. Religious authorities maintain official disapproval of our activities, while unofficially benefiting from the donations and services we provide during festivals and ceremonies. Picture priests who condemn prostitution in public sermons, but privately negotiate for special arrangements during major celebrations. Local gangs and criminal organizations sometimes provide protection services in exchange for information, sexual favors, or portions of earnings. Picture the delicate balance required to maintain these relationships without becoming completely dominated by criminal interests. Political changes at higher levels, new imperial policies, shifts in administrative personnel, modifications to existing laws, filter down through multiple bureaucratic layers before affecting our daily lives. Picture how distant decisions about taxation, military recruitment, or public morality create ripple effects that ultimately determine whether we live or die. The arrival of new officials sometimes triggers crackdowns on vice that disrupt established arrangements and force rapid adaptation to changed circumstances. Picture the fear that accompanies rumors of approaching investigations, the scramble to hide evidence of illegal activities, the desperate attempts to curry favor with new authorities. Yet these same political disruptions also create opportunities. Picture how periods of administrative chaos might allow previously impossible activities, how changes in personnel might bring officials more amenable to negotiation, how shifts in imperial policy might modify the legal framework within which we operate. Memories of freedom. Late at night, when exhaustion overcomes the demands of commercial performance, fragments of my previous life surface like artifacts recovered from buried ruins. Picture trying to remember the sound of my mother's voice, the taste of milk fresh from cattle, the feeling of grass beneath bare feet in morning meadows. These memories blur with time and trauma. Picture uncertain whether specific recollections represent actual experiences or dreams constructed to fill gaps in damaged consciousness. The girl who played in Gallic forests seems like a character from stories rather than an earlier version of my current self. Language provides the strongest connection to origins. Picture whispering phrases in my native tongue, words my mother taught me for plants and animals that exist only in distant homelands. Speaking these words becomes both comfort and torture. Comfort because they connect me to authentic identity. Torture because they emphasize everything that has been lost. Dreams sometimes reconstruct entire scenes from childhood. Picture festivals celebrating harvest seasons, gatherings where families shared food and stories, ceremonies marking passages from childhood to adulthood. These visions seem more real than waking life, creating confusion between past and present that occasionally makes current circumstances feel like temporary nightmares. The few physical reminders of origins, a bronze bracelet that belonged to my mother, a small clay figure representing household gods, acquire almost religious significance. Picture touching these objects and trying to absorb whatever essence of home might remain attached to their material substance. Yet memory also brings pain. Picture recalling parents, siblings, friends who probably died when Roman legions destroyed my village. Survival required abandoning hope of reunion, accepting that the people who gave meaning to previous existence no longer inhabit the world where I must continue living. Sometimes other slaves share their own memories, and picture how these conversations create temporary communities of loss and longing. We speak of homelands we will never see again, of languages gradually forgotten, of customs that provided structure to lives now reduced to daily survival. The cruelest aspect of memory involves recognizing how completely my current circumstances contradict everything my original culture taught about women's proper roles, family obligations, and moral behavior. Picture understanding that returning home, even if possible, would mean confronting a self so transformed by experience that acceptance becomes impossible. The final calculations. In my 8th year, Valerius calls me to his private chamber for a conversation that both of us know will determine my immediate future. Picture the room where he conducts business. Wooden table covered with wax tablets, bronze scales for weighing coins, shelves holding amphorae of wine and oil that represent his accumulated wealth. His manner remains businesslike, neither cruel nor sympathetic. Picture him explaining that economic realities require difficult decisions, that maintaining unprofitable assets contradicts sound commercial principles, that alternative arrangements must be considered for women whose earning capacity has declined below acceptable levels. The options he presents reflect the limited possibilities available to aging prostitutes. Picture sale to a brothel serving lower-class customers, where conditions are worse and prices lower, but demand remains steady, or transfer to domestic service in a household where sexual availability would be expected, but not the primary duty. A third alternative involves freedom, manumission that would end legal slavery, but provide no resources for independent survival. Picture understanding that this gift would merely transfer responsibility for my survival from Valerius to myself, in circumstances where former prostitutes face systematic exclusion from legitimate employment. The negotiation that follows involves calculations more complex than simple financial accounting. Picture Valerius weighing the costs of continued maintenance against potential profits from sale, factoring in my knowledge of his business operations and the relationships I have developed with regular customers. My own position in these discussions remains inherently weak, but not entirely without resources. Picture leveraging what small advantages remain: familiarity with his operations, knowledge of customer preferences, understanding of neighborhood dynamics that might prove valuable to competitors. The conversation extends over several days, with both parties considering implications that will determine not just immediate arrangements, but the entire trajectory of my remaining years. Picture the strange intimacy of negotiating with the person who has controlled every aspect of your existence for nearly a decade. The unexpected intervention. During the third day of negotiations, an event occurs that neither Valerius nor I anticipated. Picture Marcus Flavius, the spice merchant who has visited me weekly for years, appearing at the Lupanarium, requesting a private conversation with my owner. His proposal astounds everyone present. Picture him offering to purchase my freedom and establish me as keeper of a small boarding house that caters to provincial merchants visiting Rome. The arrangement would provide respectable employment while acknowledging my experience in dealing with men who travel far from home. The financial terms he proposes exceed what Valerius could obtain from sale to another brothel, and the boarding house arrangement offers potential for ongoing business relationships that might prove mutually profitable. Picture the delicate negotiations that follow, involving not just money but social position, legal obligations, and future expectations. Yet even this apparent rescue involves careful limitations. Picture understanding that the offer depends on my accepting a role that remains socially marginal, that my past will always define my present circumstances, that genuine respectability remains impossible regardless of changed legal status. The boarding house Marcus describes would serve merchants, traveling craftsmen, and other men whose business brings them to Rome temporarily. Picture quarters above a ground floor shop, clean rooms with adequate furnishing, meals provided to guests who pay for both lodging and discretion about activities that might occur on the premises. My role would involve managing domestic staff, maintaining accounts, ensuring that guests receive satisfactory service while avoiding attention from authorities who might question the establishment's precise nature. Picture the delicate balance this position would require: respectable enough to operate legally, discreet enough to accommodate customers whose needs extend beyond simple lodging. The legal formalities of manumission require several weeks to complete. Picture the strange period of anticipation and anxiety while documents are prepared, fees paid, and arrangements finalized. Freedom approached gradually, hedged with conditions and limitations, but freedom nonetheless. Reflections on survival. Picture standing in the doorway of the Lupanarium on the morning of departure, looking back at the place that contained my life for 8 years. The stone walls seemed smaller than memory suggested, the chambers more cramped, the entire establishment more sordid than daily familiarity had made it appear. The women who remained gathered to observe my departure, with emotions mixing envy, hope, and resignation. Picture their faces, some still young enough to dream of similar escape, others already marked by diseases and degradation that make survival the only realistic goal. Our farewells remain brief because prolonged emotion serves no practical purpose. Carrying my few possessions in a small wooden box, I walk through the streets of the Subura for what might be the last time as a resident. Picture seeing familiar shops and faces with the strange double vision of someone departing a place that has been both prison and home. The boarding house occupies a corner building near the Campus Martius, in a neighborhood that serves commercial rather than residential purposes. Picture the structure: 3 stories of cut stone with wooden shutters, a ground floor shop that will sell spices and imported goods, upper floors divided into guest chambers, and my private quarters. Marcus explains the business arrangements as we tour the premises. Picture his careful attention to details that will determine the establishment's success or failure. Location convenient to merchants, but discreet enough to avoid unwanted official attention. Staff selected for competence and reliability. Guests screened to minimize problems while ensuring adequate occupancy. The transformation from prostitute to businesswoman requires more than legal documents. Picture learning to manage accounts, to negotiate with suppliers, to handle complaints from customers who now must be pleased rather than simply serviced. The skills developed during years of survival prove unexpectedly applicable to legitimate commerce, yet the past remains present in countless small ways. Picture how former customers occasionally appear among traveling merchants seeking lodging, how their recognition creates moments of awkwardness that must be navigated carefully to protect both my new reputation and their privacy. The persistence of memory. Even in changed circumstances, the experiences of the Lupanarium continue to shape daily existence. Picture waking each morning with automatic assessment of physical condition, checking for symptoms of disease, evaluating energy levels, preparing for demands that no longer involve commercial sexual performance, but still require careful management of appearance and behavior. The habits of survival prove difficult to abandon. Picture hoarding food despite having adequate supplies, saving small amounts of money despite having regular income, remaining constantly alert to threats that no longer pose immediate danger to personal safety. Relationships with other people require careful calibration. Picture learning to interact with suppliers, guests, and neighbors without the automatic deference that bondage required or the emotional distance that prostitution demanded. These social skills, taken for granted by free-born citizens, must be consciously developed and constantly practiced. The boarding house attracts a steady stream of provincial merchants, whose conversation provides glimpses of the wider world beyond Rome's walls. Picture listening to accounts of distant cities, foreign customs, and opportunities that exist in territories where my history remains unknown. Some guests treat me with respect appropriate to a legitimate businesswoman. Others detect hints of my past and adjust their behavior accordingly, not necessarily with cruelty, but with assumptions about availability and services that extend beyond lodging and meals. Picture navigating these interactions while protecting the reputation that enables continued operation. The loneliness of respectability proves unexpectedly difficult. Picture missing the companionship of women who shared similar circumstances. The understanding that came from common experience of degradation and survival. Free citizens maintained social distances that slavery paradoxically had made unnecessary among the equally powerless. Marcus visits monthly to review business accounts and ensure the establishment operates successfully. Picture these meetings that blend elements of professional consultation, personal friendship, and continued obligation. His investment in my freedom carries expectations that, while not explicitly stated, shape our ongoing relationship. The cycles of commerce. Running a successful boarding house requires understanding rhythms of travel and trade that connect Rome to its furthest provinces. Picture learning to anticipate seasonal patterns. When merchants arrive from Egypt with grain harvests, when traders return from Germania with amber and furs, when tax collectors complete their circuits and carry revenues toward the imperial treasury. Guest registration provides fascinating insights into the empire's economic networks. Picture recording names, origins, and business purposes of travelers from Britain to Babylonia, creating an inadvertent archive of commercial relationships that span the known world. Some guests become regular customers who schedule their Roman visits around expected room availability. Picture developing personal relationships with these men, learning about their families, their hometown politics, their observations about changing conditions in distant provinces. The conversations that occur during evening meals often reveal information that would interest imperial administrators or commercial competitors. Picture the delicate responsibility of maintaining guests' privacy while occasionally extracting intelligence that might prove valuable for my own business planning or Marcus's spice trading operations. Managing domestic staff requires skills different from those developed during slavery. Picture learning to supervise rather than merely obey, to motivate workers through incentives rather than fear, to balance efficiency with the human considerations that create loyal service rather than mere compliance. The establishment's reputation grows gradually through word-of-mouth recommendations from satisfied guests. Picture how former customers become inadvertent advertisers, describing comfortable accommodations and discreet service to business associates who require similar facilities during their own travels. Revenue calculations involve more complexity than the simple transactions that characterized prostitution. Picture balancing room rates against occupancy levels, food costs against meal prices, staff wages against service quality, always seeking the optimal combination that maximizes profit while ensuring customer satisfaction. The weight of respectability. Freedom brings responsibilities and constraints that slavery, paradoxically, had not imposed. Picture the constant awareness that my behavior reflects not only on myself, but on the establishment's reputation, on Marcus's investment, on the entire network of relationships that enable my current existence. Social interactions require careful attention to boundaries and expectations. Picture learning to distinguish between customers who treat the boarding house as legitimate business and those who assume additional services remain available. These negotiations must be conducted with sufficient diplomacy to avoid offense while maintaining clear limitations. The clothing appropriate to a respectable businesswoman differs significantly from either slave garments or prostitute attire. Picture selecting fabrics, colors, and styles that announce competence and prosperity without suggesting availability for purposes beyond lodging and meals. Religious observances take on new significance when practiced by choice rather than obligation. Picture participating in neighborhood festivals and temple ceremonies as a free citizen, yet always aware that my history, if known, would exclude me from full acceptance by truly respectable society. Managing finances requires skills never developed during slavery. Picture learning to maintain account books, to plan for seasonal variations in income, to balance current expenses against future needs, to accumulate resources that might provide security against unforeseen difficulties. The legal responsibilities of property ownership and business operation create new forms of vulnerability. Picture understanding that mistakes in record keeping might attract unwanted official attention, that disputes with customers could result in legal proceedings where my testimony now carries weight, but my past might undermine credibility. Interactions with neighbors involve constant navigation between desired acceptance and necessary privacy. Picture cultivating relationships with nearby merchants and shopkeepers while deflecting inquiries about personal history that could damage carefully constructed respectability. Echoes of the past. Despite changed circumstances, memories of the lupinarium intrude into daily consciousness with startling frequency. Picture the smell of certain perfumes immediately transporting awareness back to cramped chambers, where survival depended on commercial performance, where identity dissolved into pure function. Former colleagues occasionally appear among the crowds that throng Roman streets. Picture recognizing faces from my years of slavery, seeing how disease and degradation have continued their relentless work. Understanding that my escape represents exceptional fortune rather than deserved reward for virtue or effort. The sounds of the city at night, footsteps on stone pavement, voices raised in argument or celebration, the distant music from taverns and brothels, trigger automatic responses developed during years when such sounds might herald customers, violence, or opportunities for additional income. Dreams frequently return to scenes from my years of bondage. Picture experiencing again the fear that accompanied each day's uncertainty, the physical discomfort of inadequate food and shelter, the emotional numbness required to endure systematic degradation without losing sanity entirely. Relationships with the men who now guest at my establishment sometimes echo patterns established during prostitution. Picture recognizing familiar negotiations about services and payment, similar attempts to establish personal connections that transcend purely commercial transactions. The skills developed for survival in the lupinarium prove unexpectedly useful in legitimate business. Picture applying hard-won knowledge about reading customer moods, anticipating needs, managing difficult personalities, and maintaining profitable relationships while protecting essential boundaries. Physical reminders of my previous life occasionally surface. Scars from disease or violence, habitual gestures developed to display or conceal specific attributes, automatic responses to certain types of male behavior that no longer carry immediate danger but remain embedded in muscle memory. The broader perspective picture, understanding how my individual story fits within larger patterns that affect thousands of women throughout the Roman Empire. The system that enslaved and exploited me continues operating with mechanical efficiency, processing new victims while discarding those whose utility has expired. The boarding house provides a vantage point for observing Rome's commercial networks and social hierarchies. Picture watching how wealth flows upward from the labor of slaves and free poor toward the accounts of citizens who never soil their hands with direct participation in activities that generate their comfort. Conversations with guests from distant provinces reveal how conditions vary across the empire's territories. Picture learning about places where women enjoy higher status, where slavery operates under different rules, where opportunities for advancement might be available to someone with my experience and skills. The establishment's success depends partly on providing services that supplement but do not compete with more prestigious accommodations available to wealthier travelers. Picture understanding my place in Rome's hierarchy of hospitality, above the squalid rooms that serve the desperately poor, below the elegant houses that cater to aristocratic visitors. Marcus's periodic visits provide opportunities to discuss broader economic trends that affect our business operations. Picture learning about political developments in distant provinces, changes in trade routes, modifications to imperial policies that might influence the flow of merchants through Rome. The stability of my current situation depends on factors beyond my control. Marcus's continued health and prosperity, the boarding house's reputation among target customers, the absence of political or economic disruptions that might eliminate demand for our services. Picture recognizing that while my circumstances have improved dramatically, my security remains contingent rather than permanent, dependent on continued good fortune and careful attention to factors that could easily destroy everything achieved through years of suffering and struggle. The philosophy of survival, revisited. Years of relative security provide perspective on earlier experiences that immediate survival needs had prevented me from fully processing. Picture understanding how systematic degradation affects not just behavior, but fundamental concepts of identity, relationships, and moral responsibility. The transition from slavery to freedom reveals how thoroughly bondage had shaped my understanding of human nature. Picture learning to recognize genuine kindness, to distinguish between exploitation and mutually beneficial relationships, to develop trust in circumstances where betrayal no longer carries immediate threats to survival. Religious questions that seemed irrelevant during daily struggle for existence now demand serious consideration. Picture contemplating whether my survival represents divine intervention, cosmic justice, or simply random fortune that might reverse at any moment without warning. The boarding house attracts guests whose conversations sometimes touch on philosophical questions about justice, virtue, and the proper organization of society. Picture listening to debates about slavery, women's roles, and social hierarchy conducted by men who have never experienced the circumstances they discuss so abstractly. Memory serves both as treasure and burden, preserving connections to authentic identity while constantly reminding me of losses that can never be recovered. Picture the strange double consciousness of someone who has lived multiple lives within a single body, who must integrate contradictory experiences into coherent understanding. The question of forgiveness, of masters who owned me, customers who used me, a society that created the conditions requiring my degradation, proves more complex than simple formulas of resentment or acceptance. Picture understanding that hatred consumes energy needed for survival, while forgiveness might enable healing necessary for continued existence. Planning for an uncertain future requires balancing hope against realistic assessment of possibilities. Picture calculating what resources might provide security in old age. What relationships could offer protection if current arrangements fail? What alternative sources of income might become necessary if the boarding house proves unsustainable? Conclusion: the persistence of memory. Picture looking back across the years from my current vantage point as a free woman operating a successful business, understanding how completely my experiences have shaped not just external circumstances, but internal understanding of human nature, social organization, and the relationship between power and survival. The girl who played in Gallic meadows, the young woman sold into Roman slavery, the prostitute who endured 8 years in a Subura lupinarium, and the boarding house keeper who now writes these memories, all exist simultaneously within the same consciousness, their contradictory experiences somehow requiring integration into coherent identity. The physical scars have faded somewhat, though they remain visible to careful observation. The emotional damage proves more persistent, affecting how I interpret others' motivations, how I respond to kindness or hostility, how I plan for futures that experience suggests remain fundamentally unpredictable. Yet survival itself represents a form of victory over circumstances designed to destroy human dignity and individual agency. Picture understanding that every day lived in freedom, however constrained, contradicts the expectations of systems that treat people as disposable commodities. The boarding house continues operating successfully, providing services that genuine merchants value while maintaining the discretion that protects both their interests and my reputation. Marcus remains a reliable business partner whose investment in my freedom has proved profitable for both parties. Picture recognition that my story, while unique in its specific details, represents patterns that countless other women have experienced throughout Rome's history and across its territories. The individual suffering that seemed so overwhelming during its occurrence becomes part of larger narratives about power, exploitation, and the human capacity for adaptation. Memory preserves not only trauma, but also moments of unexpected beauty, human connection, and moral clarity that emerged from the most degraded circumstances. Picture understanding that these fragments of grace, however brief and rare, provided the spiritual resources necessary for continued resistance against complete dehumanization. The empire that enslaved me continues its expansion and exploitation, processing new victims while discarding old ones with mechanical efficiency. Yet within this vast system, individual lives sometimes find paths toward dignity and agency that no institutional power can entirely eliminate. Picture the strange comfort that comes from understanding one's place in historical forces, larger than individual experience, while simultaneously maintaining the conviction that each person's struggle for survival and meaning represents irreducible value that no economic calculation can adequately measure. These memories, recorded in the quiet hours after guests have retired and accounts have been balanced, serve as testament to experiences that official histories never acknowledge, voices that imperial chronicles never preserve, truths that respectable society prefers to ignore, but which remain essential to understanding the full cost of Roman civilization. Picture the responsibility that comes with survival, to bear witness to what others endured without hope of escape, to remember names and faces that would otherwise disappear entirely from human memory, to insist that dignity persists, even in circumstances designed to destroy it completely. The sun sets over Rome each evening as it has for centuries, casting long shadows across streets where commerce and suffering intertwine in patterns as old as the city itself. Tomorrow will bring new guests, new opportunities, new challenges to navigate with wisdom earned through experiences that no freeborn citizen could imagine surviving. Picture the profound fatigue that accompanies this knowledge, not just physical exhaustion from daily labor, but the deep weariness that comes from understanding too much about human nature's capacity for both cruelty and unexpected grace. Yet, also picture the stubborn persistence that refuses to surrender hope entirely, that continues seeking meaning in circumstances where meaning often seems absent. In quiet moments before sleep, when the boarding house settles into nighttime stillness, memory sometimes recovers fragments of earlier innocence. The taste of clean water, the sound of wind through trees, the feeling of safety that existed before history's forces transformed a free Gallic girl into a Roman prostitute, and finally, into whatever I have become. These memories no longer bring only pain. Picture understanding them as evidence of an essential self that survived everything designed to destroy it. Proof that human dignity possesses resources deeper than any system of oppression can completely eliminate. The story continues each day as the boarding house opens its doors to new travelers, as Rome expands its territories, as individual lives intersect with historical forces in ways that create both suffering and unexpected possibilities for redemption. Picture the strange mixture of gratitude and sorrow that accompanies this recognition. Gratitude for survival, sorrow for all who did not survive to tell their stories. In the end, perhaps survival itself represents the only victory possible within systems designed to reduce people to functions, commodities, and statistics. Picture the quiet satisfaction that comes from maintaining humanity under circumstances that should have destroyed it, from preserving memory when forgetting would be easier, from insisting on dignity when dignity seems impossible. The bronze mirror in my chamber reflects a face marked by experiences no cosmetics can entirely conceal, yet also showing evidence of healing that seemed impossible during the worst years. Picture understanding that this reflection contains all the previous versions of myself: the child, the slave, the prostitute, the survivor, each contributing essential elements to whatever wisdom I have managed to accumulate. Rome endures, the empire expands, new slaves replace old ones in establishments throughout the Subura. Yet each individual story represents irreducible value that no historical narrative can adequately capture. No economic analysis can fully explain. No moral philosophy can completely comprehend. Picture the responsibility of bearing witness to experiences that respectable society prefers to ignore, of preserving memories that official histories systematically exclude, of insisting that dignity persists even in the most degraded circumstances. This responsibility shapes each day's choices, influences every interaction with guests and neighbors, determines how I understand my place in the continuing story of human struggle against dehumanizing forces. The boarding house represents more than economic security. It serves as monument to survival, proof that individual agency can sometimes find paths through systems designed to eliminate it entirely. Picture the deep satisfaction that comes from this recognition, tempered by awareness that such outcomes depend on fortune as much as effort, that countless others deserved similar opportunities but never received them. As night settles over the eternal city, as oil lamps flicker in windows throughout neighborhoods where survival requires daily negotiation between hope and despair, memory preserves testimony to experiences that shaped not just one woman's life, but the entire foundation upon which Roman civilization rests. The labor and suffering of those whose stories remain largely untold. Picture the strange peace that comes with accepting this role as witness and survivor. Understanding that preservation of memory represents both burden and privilege, knowing that each day lived in relative freedom honors those who died in bondage. The story continues, written in lives rather than scrolls, preserved in experience rather than archives, testament to truths that no imperial power can entirely suppress.